Good day. My name's Enrique Alvarez. I'm with Vector Global Logistics, and we're having this amazing fire chat with a Matthew Burchette. Before I let Pedro introduce him, I will introduce Pedro, who's my co-host today. And Pedro, how are you doing today? Good morning.
Hi, Enrique. How are you doing? Everything all good? I'm glad to be here and just to have an amazing conversation with Matthew. Matthew Burchette is a senior curator of the Museum of Flight, and that museum is actually the world's largest independent nonprofit air and space museum in the world. How are you, Matthew?
I am great. How are you, Pedro? It's good to see you again, and good to meet you, Enrique.
Very nice to meet you, Matthew. Good to see you, Pedro, as well. And Matthew, thank you very much for joining us. I mean, you have such an interesting job. I got to say, it's the first time I've ever spoken to like a real live curator. And to start, I have seen what curators do, probably mostly from movies and things like that. But if you could tell us a little more about what a curator is and what you do and some of the experiences that you probably must have pursuing your career. And of course, as the curator of the world's largest Museum of Flight.
Well, let me start by saying I'm probably not your normal curator. It's a fun job. It is a really fun job. I get to do so many fun things. The way I like to explain it in short is I get to play with all the toys. You know, all the planes and all that kind of stuff are under my purview. So, you know, if we're working on something, I'm usually right there in it. Take, for example, right now, we have a World War I German fighter called a Pfalz D-12, and it's an original airframe. I mean, it flew in World War I. And the story is this particular airplane was captured or just taken over at the end of the war. It was crated up with another one, and it was sent back to the U.S. Somewhere along the lines, it was mislabeled as a Fokker D7, and so we already had quite a few Fokkers over here. And so somebody went, man, we don't need another one of these. And so literally these two planes just sat in the crates until about 1920 something. Somebody opened them up and went, well, that's not a Fokker, that's actually a Pfalz. It ended up being bought by a gentleman, Frank Tallman, who is kind of known as the father of Hollywood aviation. And he had literally his own tiny little Air Force. And so if there were any sort of aerial stunts that needed to take place in a movie, he was the guy that did it. And so this plane, he flew or was flown during quite a few movies in the 20s and 30s. And once Tallman was done with it, it changed hands many different times. Ended up with a guy by the name of Doug Champlin, who had a very large collection of aircraft in Arizona. At one point, we entered into conversations with Doug and ended up purchasing his entire collection. And it became what we called the PCW at the museum, the Personal Courage Wing, and its entire building. The lower floor is all World War II aviation, and the second floor is World War I, and this plane was part of that. And so when I started at the museum, I was, just getting to know the lay of the land, looking at all the stuff, and I started looking at this Pfalz, and I noticed that the covering on the wings was pulling away. It was literally ripping and had been repaired with clear packing tape. Oh. Because frankly, people didn't want to go to the trouble of repairing this thing the way it needed to be done. And I thought, no, that's not the way I'm going to do it here. So I knew that I had a job in front of me because in World War I, the Germans used a very particular type of fabric on their aircraft. And it's composed of these different sizes and shapes of geometric form. Wow. Nowadays, they're called lozenges. They're kind of like rhomboids, but they're different sizes and they are different colors. So you had a different color fabric for the upper wing and you had a lighter color for the bottom wing. So these lozenges are pink and dark blue, light blue. There's an ochre color. There's a green in there, whereas the bottom colors are much lighter. So lighter blues, couple of different pinks. So I knew that's in the plane itself had that covering on it, but it had been painted on, which was completely wrong. In World War I, this was screen printed using large rollers onto linen fabric, not cotton or modern Seconite. So I thought, I got to find some of this fabric. It's got to be out there. And if I can't find it, we'll have to replicate some. So it took me about a month or more of reaching out to these different places, because I found a reference to a man who had some of this printed up. He had gone to Belgium
Wow.
to find the right linen. I learned a lot about how linen is actually made. You take the flax and you beat on it until the strips come off. But before you even do that, you take the linen and you either lay it in the field and let it get wet for about a month, or you cut it down and you throw it into a river.
It's amazing the amount of research and knowledge and
I mean,
everything to patch up this plane.
Just
that, of
to
course,
patch up a plane.
wow.
So, a month of all this, learning how this is, finally in desperation, I just emailed a kind of World War I museum up in Canada. And I said, I know this stuff is out there. And they went, oh yeah, we know the guy. So they shot me his email and I shot him an email and I said, here's what I need to do. I need to repair a fault. So I need, X amount of this fabric. And he said, yeah, I got you covered.
Nice.
So as it turns out, then I said, well, we've never worked with linen before. Would you be willing to come down to Seattle and help us out? Maybe spend 3 days and give us a little tutorial. And he was like, sure. I said, we'll pay for it. We'll pay you for your time. So he flew over from Pennsylvania and he spent 3 days out here. And there it is. We've now got our stuff, and turns out this man is a gold mine of information. He worked for Peter Jackson, the director of all the Lord of the Rings movies and King Kong. Well, Sir Peter Jackson is a huge World War I nut, to the point where he decided he wanted some of his own World War I aircraft. Well, he didn't want to go the route of doing what's known as an experimental. If he had just built a plane, to make it look like a Fokker D7, it would have had to have been labeled an experimental, and there's some FAA regulations around that. So he just started literally his own aircraft production company.
Whoa.
And so they're not experimentals. It's a brand new Fokker D7, and he's got like 80 some odd different planes.
Wow.
Anyway, this gentleman, Fred Murrin, was working for him. And so he came down, helped us out, and he's been helping us ever since, doing research and contacting his people and going, well, now here's the way faults put their covering on, and da-da-da-da-da-da. So what we've been doing is we've been recovering this plane a little bit at a time. We started with the tail, and that's the easiest part. And I put easy in air quotes, because they're the smaller pieces, but it's still a multi-step process for each piece. And then we're going to tackle the wings. And to me, this is where the real geeky part of me comes out. This fabric, since it's not painted, it's screen printed on, it's translucent. So you can see the light coming through it, which means that you can see all the ribs and the spars and the wing. And when it's in the museum, there are lights above it, which are LEDs. So they're not sending out anything bad like UV light. You'll be able to see all that interior framework, which is exactly what it would have looked like in World War I. And so that's where I get really excited, because, it's our guests are going to be able to see something that they normally really wouldn't see. So yeah, that's just one of the things that I get to do. What really, I think, got me the job was back at my old position with Wings Over the Rockies in Denver. We had started a video blog that turned into actually a PBS show called Behind the Wings.
Nice.
And so that was big. And so the Museum of Flight kind of wanted to go in a more, they wanted to reach out to a larger audience. And so, you know, that was a plus in my book when they were looking for a new curator. And so we have now started our own version of Behind the Wings, except in this case, it's called Curator on the Loose, which I think is more fitting. And then, of course, you know, the pandemic shut everything down. So we had to pivot. And instead of going out to do stories for Curator on the Loose, we're staying in the museum and we're just talking about what we have, you know, in our own collection. So luckily, during the summer, when the pandemic kind of died down for a little bit, we were able to go out, and we just went across the field to the Boeing Aircraft Rescue Firefighters, otherwise known as ARFs. And we filmed with them, and we got in their fire truck and we blew water around, and I got to use the hose and put on all their gear and all that kind of stuff. It's a lot of fun.
It
So,
sounds incredible. And I actually
oh
have
my
like just
gosh.
very two quick follow-up questions. One, of course, please send us the link so that people can actually look at this. And I don't know the Curator on the Loose. I don't know if you already launched it. I don't know kind of what's going on with it, but we would love to participate and promote it. And of course, take a look at it because it sounds fascinating and exciting. And I guess the second question is like, where do I send you my resume? Because this seems like a really cool job to have.
It is.
What are the things that worked or didn't work that you couldn't have predicted in your career? It doesn't have to be with this particular job that you currently have, but like just in your career, some of the things that you could probably surprise you in creating some of these innovative experiences.
The one thing that I love about my career, I mean, I love my career just in general. One of the things that I've really learned is to always assume things are going to take longer than you think they are going to take. I have been really lucky in that I have headed up some big projects. I wrote a grant for over $250,000 to help fund a new roof for Wings Over the Rockies in Denver. You know, that was a huge project, you know, and one day, you know, all of a sudden we've got people calling us because the guys on the roof that are contractors are not wearing safety gear, and they've called OSHA. So you have to go have a conversation with the OSHA inspector. Those are people that do not have a sense of humor.
Well, they have to do that, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
they are like fire
particular
marshals.
and-
Those two individual types of people just do not have a
Which is
sense of
not
humor,
part of
which
their
is fine
job
because you need those kind of people in that
Right.
job.
Right.
But, you know, I'm kind of a funny guy. I like to inject humor into everything. That did not work on OSHA inspectors.
So sometimes humor does not.
They
does
are
not
very
work.
cut and dried. You know, we redid the floor in Wings Over the Rockies, which means that we put down epoxy, which means that we took out all 30 aircraft that were in that building, towed them outside, put them in our parking lot, had to get a fence around the entire parking lot. I learned very quickly that when talking to your boss, make sure you under promise and over deliver.
That's it. Perfect, right? Under promise, over deliver. Amazing piece of advice for any kind of role, for any kind of job, and I'm guessing it is for any kind of industry as well.
Thank you so much about telling all this information and your experience, Matthew. And for those of you watching, thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed this interview and want to hear more advice and lessons learned from nonprofits and social impacts companies, be sure to hit subscribe. We'll see you on the next time.
Excellent. Thank you guys so much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you. This was a lot of
This has
fun. Thank you, Pedro.
Been a ton of fun.
Thank you, Matt.